Welcome back to the ELL Sharing Podcast. Poe, tell me, how many times have you heard someone say, "Oh, I could never do that. I'm just not built for it," or "She's a genius. She was born with that talent."
It's the ultimate intellectual comfort blanket, isn't it? The idea that some people are just naturally wired for greatness and the rest of us are, well, not. It's more than a comfort blanket, Nana. It's an entrenched cognitive barrier. If we are to address the central thesis of our show, how to truly excel, regardless of perceived natural ability, we have to start by dismantling that initial assumption. The notion you're describing is what psychological research terms the fixed mindset.
The fixed mindset sounds incredibly restrictive.
It is. A fixed mindset is the belief that core abilities, intelligence, talent, even personality traits are fixed, immutable qualities. You get what you're dealt at birth, and that's your ceiling. It turns every challenge into a judgment. If you struggle, it's not because your strategy is flawed. It's proof that you don't have what it takes.
So, if I'm learning a new language and I make a mistake, my fixed mindset voice says, "You're just not a language person. Stop embarrassing yourself." The entire focus shifts from improving the skill to proving the existing ability.
Precisely. And this has measurable consequences across global academic and professional settings. Studies show that when individuals operate under this fixed belief, they tend to avoid challenges that might expose a weakness and give up easily when faced with obstacles. They prioritize looking smart over actually learning.
Which makes perfect sense because if effort is needed, it implies a lack of natural ability. And that undermines the whole fixed talent narrative.
Exactly. A person with a fixed mindset views effort as a negative signal. They think, if I have to try hard, I must not be very smart. Compare this to a universally observed phenomenon. Successful experts across all domains, from mathematics to music, all report that the journey to mastery was effortful and involved significant struggle. Their success stems from an alternate, more powerful belief system.
The plot thickens. We're moving from the restrictive fixed mindset to its transformative counterpart. Let's formally introduce it. This concept is the key to unlocking the potential in what people might dismiss as clumsy or untalented individuals.
This counter theory was rigorously defined by psychologist Carol Dweck in her research on success and achievement, the growth mindset. It is the belief that intellectual ability, skills, and talents are malleable. They are not set in stone, but can be developed and increased through dedication, effective strategies, and help from others.
I love the framing of that. It's not about being smart, it's about getting smarter. It reframes the entire process of struggle. A challenge isn't a dead end, it's the specific mechanism for growth. If you hit a wall, you don't conclude, "I can't do this." You conclude, "I need a better strategy."
That's the core behavioral shift. When students, professionals, or athletes adopt a growth mindset, they respond to setbacks with resilience. They look at the challenge and think, maybe I need to change my approach or try harder.
It transforms failure from a verdict on your identity into mere data. Data that tells you which strategies didn't work. This shifts the focus away from internal innate limits and towards external controllable factors. I believe some of the latest neuroscience research supports the idea that the brain is far more adaptable than we once thought, reinforcing the idea of malleability.
You are absolutely correct, Nana. And this is where the analytical data grounds the philosophical concept. Research into neuroplasticity provides the biological evidence for the growth mindset. We know the brain is like a muscle. It physically gets stronger and rewires itself when it's challenged, when it tries new strategies, and when it actively seeks feedback. This evidence moves the growth mindset from a nice-to-have philosophy to a verifiable biological mechanism for improvement. This is globally applicable knowledge. It's a fundamental aspect of human learning, irrespective of cultural or geographic context.
The analogy of the brain as a muscle is powerful because it makes effort less about brute force and more about targeted training. So, if the fixed mindset holds you back, the growth mindset unlocks the possibility. But possibility isn't performance. We know simply believing you can be good isn't enough. You still need to know how to apply that effort efficiently.
A crucial distinction, Nana. Belief is the engine, but the next step requires an expert-level methodology, a structured approach to effort that maximizes return on time invested. Just putting in hours doesn't guarantee mastery. Putting in the right type of hours does. This is where we transition from the psychology of belief to the data science of optimal practice.
And I think that's the most critical pivot for our listeners. Once we accept that ability is developed, the question becomes, what is the globally recognized, scientifically proven development plan?
The most effective plan moves beyond general hard work and into a concept popularized by researcher K. Anders Ericsson. It is highly structured, fundamentally different from what most people call practice, and absolutely essential for achieving expert-level performance in any field. We're talking about deliberate practice.
That sounds like the perfect point to pause and prepare for the deep dive. When we return, Poe, I want you to deconstruct this deliberate practice methodology, what it is, how it's different from the common, less effective practice habits, and most importantly, how our listeners can start applying its core principles immediately. We'll look at case studies from global fields like chess, music, and sports to see this structured effort in action.
An excellent roadmap. It allows us to move from the abstract belief system to a concrete, quantifiable mechanism for skill acquisition.
Before the break, we established that a growth mindset is the belief that skills can be developed. But Poe, you are setting up the true engine of expertise, a concept called deliberate practice. From your analytical perspective, what is it and how does it differ from just, say, logging 10,000 hours of piano playing?
The distinction is vital. Deliberate practice is a highly structured activity designed specifically to improve current performance. It is not just repetition. It is purposeful, systematic work. The 10,000-hour rule, which became popularized, often loses the crucial modifier. It has to be deliberate hours.
So, if a guitarist plays the same 3 songs every day for 10 years, that's regular practice. It just makes the same level of performance permanent. What makes it deliberate?
Deliberate practice must satisfy 3 non-negotiable, universally applicable criteria. It is effortful and not inherently enjoyable. The activity must push the performer beyond their current level of competence, demanding full concentration. You are specifically targeting your weakest points, which is uncomfortable. It requires breaking skills into smaller parts. The practice must involve focusing on highly specific tasks designed to overcome identified weaknesses. You don't practice the whole piece. You practice the challenging measure at a much slower tempo repeatedly. And it demands immediate and continual feedback. You need a system, often a qualified coach or highly developed self-monitoring skills, to assess your performance, identify errors, and guide the focus of your next practice cycle.
That third point, the feedback loop, sounds like the technical linchpin. It's the difference between practicing in the dark and practicing under a spotlight. A tennis player serving a basket of balls is just practicing, but a tennis player using a radar gun to track their velocity, then reviewing video with a coach to correct their wrist angle, then immediately trying the serve again with the specific goal of increasing rotation, that's deliberate.
That is an excellent, globally relevant analogy. The coach or the feedback mechanism provides the necessary rigorous skills assessment. Without it, you risk practicing mistakes and leading to what is called automaticity and rested development. The feedback minimizes errors and frustration by allowing for the successful approximation of the target performance.
That's fascinating because it means true expertise isn't about some mystical, innate spark. It's a highly optimized, data-driven system. It's the ultimate evidence against the fixed mindset.
It is. Consider the classic research on world-class violinists. The findings consistently showed that the highest achieving group was not differentiated by raw hours or general musical activity. The variable that strongly correlated with their elite status was the amount of solitary practice, the highly concentrated,
effortful time they spent alone, specifically focused on improving skills away from performance pressure. This solitary practice time is the closest proxy for true deliberate practice.
So the secret isn't more hours, it's more quality, focused intensity. I think many people try to apply this only to physical or creative skills like sports or art. Does the research show it applies to intellectual pursuits as well? Say, data science or complex strategic roles?
Absolutely. The principles are universal. Deliberate practice helps you build highly sophisticated mental representations of the target knowledge. For a data scientist, this might mean practicing abstract problem solving by trying to debug a complex system with a specific constraint, not just solving a problem, but trying to solve it using a new, more efficient algorithm. For a chess master, it means studying historical games not just to remember moves, but to refine the underlying pattern recognition and strategic thinking.
The point is always about pushing the boundary of current knowledge or ability. This requires a certain level of discipline and dedication over the long term, which ties directly back into a concept that's often discussed alongside deliberate practice.
Unnecessary bridge. Effortful practice is not inherently motivating. It is uncomfortable and it can take years, often a decade, to reach a high level of performance. Therefore, the system requires strong motivational constraint, the long-term stamina to sustain the effort. That is where the psychological trait of grit comes into play, the perseverance and passion for long-term goals.
It seems the structure of expertise isn't a pyramid with a tiny sliver of talent at the top. It's a foundational belief, growth mindset, supporting a high-fidelity execution plan, deliberate practice, all fueled by long-term perseverance, grit. That is a globally accessible roadmap for anyone.
Exactly. And to make this actionable for our listeners, we need to focus on how to establish this process in their daily lives. In the next segment, we'll analyze the critical components of the deliberate practice cycle, setting rigorous goals and utilizing the power of structured analytical reflection.
I think that will be incredibly useful, Poe. Shifting from just doing the work to working smarter is where the real leverage is. We're talking about the scientific roadmap to mastery, the shift from a fixed mindset to the methodology of deliberate practice. Poe, in the last segment, you mentioned that this type of practice requires two more critical components to make it actionable: setting rigorous goals and utilizing structured reflection. Let's break down the goal setting first. What does a deliberate goal look like?
A deliberate goal is entirely different from a general aspiration like, I want to be a great leader. It is hyper-specific, measurable, and focuses exclusively on the process of improvement, not the outcome. We borrow a principle from engineering. The goal must challenge the boundaries of your current ability. For a salesperson aiming to improve, a non-deliberate goal might be make more sales. A deliberate goal is, for the next week, I will isolate the first 2 minutes of every client interaction and focus solely on reducing my use of filler words by 50%.
The specificity is the key. You're not trying to be perfect, you're trying to move from 70% proficiency to 75% proficiency on one tiny decomposable task. It's about achieving incremental gains. This avoids the paralyzing feeling of trying to master an entire skill at once.
Exactly. Deliberate practice is predicated on breaking skills into smaller parts. This applies globally. A surgeon in training doesn't practice a full operation, they practice one specific knot or one type of incision until it becomes flawless in a simulated environment. It is repetitive performance of intended skills, but always with an explicit, high-intensity focus on the element currently holding back performance.
That brings us to the second and arguably most important component, the feedback loop. Once I've focused my effort on reducing filler words, how do I objectively know if I'm succeeding, especially if I don't have a personal coach?
This is where you must develop a capacity for self-monitoring and self-regulation. When an external coach isn't present, the practitioner must create an internal or technical system to replace that function. For your sales example, the self-monitoring system would be to record the interaction and then listen back specifically to count the filler words.
So the recording becomes my objective coach. It allows me to analyze my performance with rigor without the subjective bias of how I felt the conversation went.
Correct. This is the act of reflection.
actively reviewing one's own performance to augment improvement and facilitate future practice. Without reflection, practice leads to diminishing returns, simply entrenching existing errors. A growth mindset allows you to welcome this reflection, viewing the errors as valuable data rather than personal failings.
That's a huge psychological hurdle. A fixed mindset person avoids feedback because it feels like criticism. A growth mindset person actively seeks feedback from mentors, peers, or self-monitoring systems because it's a tool for professional development.
The research confirms this behavioral difference. Individuals with the growth orientation show greater openness to feedback and a higher motivation to learn from failure. They understand that the feedback, no matter how blunt, is instrumental in achieving those further improvements in performance.
I'm seeing a complete cyclical process here. It starts with the growth mindset belief. That belief powers the grit needed for long-term effort. The effort is then channeled into a deliberate practice cycle of setting hyper-specific goals, executing high-intensity practice, and then closing the loop with rigorous, objective feedback and reflection.
You have synthesized the system perfectly. It is an iterative cycle. And this entire structure, this belief system and execution framework, is the true engine behind what the world mistakenly labels as talent or genius. It's a highly refined system of learning that, when sustained over time, leads to qualitatively different levels of expert performance.
So, in our final segment, let's tie this universal roadmap back to the individual. How can our listeners take this powerful analytical framework and start applying it to their own professional and personal development goals today? How do we build that structure for continuous improvement?
We must conclude with providing actionable steps. The final segment should focus on building the scaffolding necessary for sustaining deliberate practice. Things like finding mentorship, scheduling peak focus time, and consistently celebrating the process, not just the outcome.
I think that's a perfect way to bring the discussion home. We've arrived at the final segment of the ELL Sharing Podcast, and we've built a powerful roadmap. Start with a growth mindset fueled by grit, and execute using the structured methodology of deliberate practice. Poe, this sounds like a marathon. How do our listeners build the infrastructure to sustain this intense, highly focused effort over the long term?
The system for long-term improvement requires what I call scaffolding, institutionalizing the principles we've discussed. There are 3 key universally applicable components to maintaining this expert system. Component 1, structural focus and energy management. Deliberate practice is effortful and requires full concentration. You cannot do it casually.
That's a crucial insight. Most people practice when they feel like it or when they can squeeze it in.
Precisely. To make it work, you must schedule peak focus time. Studies on experts, such as musicians, show that high-quality, deliberate practice is often limited to around 4 to 5 hours per day, broken into shorter, intense sessions, sometimes only an hour at a time. The intensity demands you prioritize recovery. You must avoid exhaustion and limit practice to an amount from which you can completely recover daily or weekly.
So it's about intensity over duration. You're better off doing 45 minutes of brutally honest, focused work on your weakest skill than 4 hours of mindlessly repeating what you already know.
Component 2, institutionalizing feedback and mentorship. We stressed that immediate objective feedback is non-negotiable for deliberate practice. What if you can't hire a world-class coach?
Then you must actively seek out other forms of structural feedback. A qualified teacher or preceptor is ideal for guiding the process and shaping reflection. If you cannot secure one-on-one coaching, look for mentorship. Individuals who can review your work and provide specific, actionable critiques.
And for those without direct mentorship?
You become your own coach by committing to analytical reflection. This involves creating a systematic review of your own output. For a developer, it's rigorously reviewing your code for efficiency. For a writer, it's forcing yourself to analyze what specific sentence structures or word choices are causing the most friction for the reader. The key is to be objective and always focus on process refinement.
Component free, the mindset of the journey. Finally, Poe, this journey takes years. How do we keep the motivation, the grit, From running out.
By shifting the way we reward ourselves. The fixed mindset celebrates innate success and outcomes. The expert, using a growth mindset, must learn to celebrate effort and incremental progress.
Celebrating effort, not just the A grade or the closed deal.
Exactly. Consistent effort over time is the key to mastery. Every challenge is a learning opportunity, and every small victory in breaking down a complex skill deserves acknowledgement. By focusing and rewarding the consistent application of the deliberate practice cycle, you cultivate the intrinsic motivation needed for the 10-year journey to expertise.
So the myth of the born genius is just that, a myth. The reality is that expertise is a high-fidelity system. It's a growth mindset that turns fear into data, grit that powers the long haul, and the scientific rigor of deliberate practice that ensures every minute spent pushes you toward a qualitatively higher level of performance. It is a roadmap accessible to anyone willing to put in the right kind of work.
The research is clear. Human capacity is not fixed. It is developed. You may have been dealt a hand, but how you play it, with structured, deliberate, and relentless effort, determines the outcome.